The November wind bit at my face as I walked out of Meridian Capital's gleaming headquarters for the last time. 23 months of climbing, bleeding, sacrificing, evaporated in 7 minutes. 7 minutes. I could still see his smirk. Still hear the laughter echoing off those glass walls. Marcus Reed, CEO of Meridian Capital, sat at the head of the mahogany boardroom table like a king surveying his court. His tailored Brioni suit cost more than my monthly rent. His watch, a Patek Philippe his mistress had bought him, caught the light as he gestured toward me with theatrical disdain. "Nathan," he'd said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey, "maybe you're just too serious for this company. Too rigid. We need visionaries here. Innovators. Not." He paused, letting the silence cut deeper than any word. "Accountants." The room had erupted. Not in support of me, but for him, his inner circle, the golden boys and girls who arrived late, left early, and somehow always got promoted, laughed like it was the funniest joke they'd heard all year. Among them sat Victoria Ashford, his mistress, dressed in a white Chanel suit that screamed money and entitlement. She looked at me with contempt, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against the table in rhythm with the laughter. My promotion, the vice president position I'd earned through meticulous work, through nights spent fixing the messes Marcus created, had just been handed to Derek Valois, a man who once nearly lost us a $40 million client because he'd been too hungover to attend a meeting. Derek had winked at me as I left the room. Humiliation doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly, settles into your chest, and slowly asphyxiates you from the inside. I'd been the fixer. For nearly 2 years, I'd been the invisible hand that caught every mistake before it became public knowledge. When Marcus promised clients deliverables we couldn't meet, I restructured entire workflows. When he flirted with tax code violations, I'd quietly corrected course. When he made enemies, I'd smoothed relationships and turned disasters into minor setbacks. And he'd repaid my loyalty with contempt. That night, alone in my apartment on the Upper East Side, a modest one-bedroom I'd scrimped afford, I sat in darkness and made a decision. Not in anger, in clarity. Marcus Reed had underestimated me. He confused my silence with weakness, my competence with submission, my integrity with naivety. He'd assumed that because I didn't speak loudly or dress for attention, I was harmless. He was about to discover the most dangerous thing in the world, a brilliant person with nothing left to lose. 3 days later, November 12, 2023, I returned to Meridian Capital on Monday morning. Resignation nowhere in sight. My co-workers exchanged glances as I passed my cubicle. The whispers had already started. Nathan's leaving. He has to leave. It's over for him. No one expected what was coming. By evening, I begun compiling a personal file. Nothing illegal, nothing unethical. Just documented facts. Emails, calendar invitations, screenshots of Slack conversations. Information that was already there, already accessible, already sitting in plain sight. But that was just the beginning. I scheduled a coffee meeting with Sarah Chun, our senior compliance officer. Sarah was quiet, overlooked, brilliant. She'd been passed over for promotions 4 times because she wouldn't laugh at Marcus's off-color jokes or pretend his decisions made sense when they didn't. "Sarah," I said, stirring my cappuccino at the cafe down the street, "I want to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest." She looked up, wary. "Okay. Has Marcus ever asked you to sign off on financial decisions you weren't comfortable with?" Her jaw tightened. I saw the conflict in her eyes, the fear of speaking up, the weariness of being the only one who seemed to care. "Why are you asking me this?" "Because I think there's a pattern," I said quietly, "and I think you've noticed it too." 3 hours later, Sarah gave me access to something invaluable. 7 instances where Marcus had pressured her to approve expenditures that violated our own internal compliance standards. Nothing catastrophic, but significant, documentable. A pattern that, taken together, suggested not just poor judgment, but deliberate circumvention of protocol. "What are you going to do with this?" Sarah asked, fear and hope warring in her voice. "I'm going to be patient," I said, "and I'm going to be careful. That's all you need to know." 6 weeks later, December 28th, 2023. I'd been quiet, methodical, invisible. Every day, I absorbed more information. Every conversation, every meeting I attended, every email I received, it all went into a private, encrypted file on my personal laptop. I befriended James Liu, our IT director. James was angry. Marcus had denied him a raise that should have been automatic, then given a substantial bonus to Marcus's college roommate who'd just been hired and couldn't even access the company's basic systems correctly. Over lunch, James became a willing source of information. The thing is, James said, leaning across the table, I've got access to everything. Email servers, calendar backups, deleted files. Marcus thinks because I don't speak up that I'm fine with how I'm treated. He's about to learn otherwise. I never asked James to do anything unethical. I didn't have to. His anger was a match looking for kindling. January 15th, 2024. The first public test. During a quarterly business review, I sat across from Marcus and Victoria, along with two major clients, the Hendersons from Westwood Partners. Marcus was presenting Q4 projections, smooth and confident, explaining how his strategic vision had driven record growth. I waited for him to make the inevitable mistake. He always did. The difference was that he'd never been corrected publicly before. Marcus, I said, interrupting mid-sentence, my voice polite and deferential, I think there might be a discrepancy in those client acquisition costs. Could you walk the Hendersons through how you arrived at that number? The room went still. Marcus's smile didn't falter, but I saw it, the flicker of irritation in his eyes. Those are projections, Nathan. Conservative estimates. Actually, I continued, pulling up a document I prepared meticulously. Our Q3 numbers show a significant variance from these projections. The Hendersons might want to understand if that's an error in the model or if Q4 is expected to perform fundamentally differently. The Hendersons exchanged glances. Mr. Henderson leaned forward, suddenly very interested. He's right, Victoria said, rushing to Marcus's defense. Those are just estimates, Nathan. You're being pedantic. But it was too late. Doubt had been planted. The Hendersons asked 6 more questions. Marcus stumbled through the answers. The presentation ended on a sour note. As people filed out, Marcus pulled me aside. That was unnecessary, he said. His voice dropped low, dangerous, making me look bad in front of clients. I was just clarifying numbers. I said, meeting his gaze without flinching. For accuracy. He didn't believe me. He was beginning to suspect something. But paranoia, I was learning, was my greatest ally. February 2024. The cracks widened. I began documenting incidents that had been happening all along, but never organized, never weaponized. Like the time Marcus had pressured Sarah to approve a $2.3 million vendor contract with a company owned by Victoria's brother, a contract that would yield her a hidden commission. Sarah had flagged a conflict of interest, but Marcus had assured her it was fine, that he'd handle it with the board. I found the emails. All of them. Carefully preserved by someone who knew they'd need protection someday. Like the time Marcus had promised a client specific deliverables, then missed them by weeks. The client had quietly sued for breach of contract. Marcus had settled it under the table, paying $800,000 out of company accounts with a non-disclosure agreement. I found the settlement papers in his personal file, filed incorrectly, tucked away where someone less meticulous might have missed them. Most damaging. Like the time Marcus had hired his nephew, given him a title, Vice Director of Growth, a salary, $140,000, and 0 job responsibilities. The nephew worked from home, attended no meetings, and did no work. But he received full benefits and stock options. It was pure nepotism, a gift hidden inside the budget with a false job code. Each piece of the puzzle was small, individually explainable. Together, they formed a portrait of a man who'd forgotten there were rules for people like him too. March 10th, 2024. Marcus began to crack. His paranoia was becoming visible. He'd started calling sudden meetings to ask who'd spoken to whom. He'd begun reviewing emails obsessively. He'd snapped at Victoria in the hallway. I watched her face shift, the first time she'd seen him without his mask on. She didn't like what she saw. He called me into his office. "Is there something wrong?" he asked, his voice deceptively calm. "Between us, you seem observant lately." I'd rehearsed this moment 100 times. "No, sir, I'm just doing my job." "You're doing more than your job," he said, standing, walking to the window. "You're asking questions, making yourself visible. It's unusual for you." "I care about accuracy," I said simply. He turned to face me, and I saw the shift in his eyes. He was beginning to understand that I wasn't angry. I was something worse. I was systematic. "If you're planning something," he said quietly, "I'd reconsider. I have resources you can't imagine. Lawyers, connections. I can destroy you, professionally, financially, personally. Whatever you're thinking, it won't end well." It was a threat, a genuine, bone-chilling threat from a man used to being obeyed. I held his gaze. "I'm not planning anything, Marcus. I'm just working." March 28th, 2024. The board's quarterly audit began. I'd never spoken to the board directly. That wasn't my role. But Sarah Chin had. Sarah had scheduled a meeting with Thomas Blackwell, the board's compliance chair, to discuss procedural concerns she'd noticed. She didn't mention me. She didn't name Marcus. She simply laid out facts, dates, and documentation. Thomas Blackwell was a man who'd built his career on spotting fraud. He recognized the architecture when he saw it. 3 days later, the board announced an internal investigation into compliance and financial procedure. No names were mentioned publicly, but I could see the fear crystallize in Marcus's face when the announcement came. Victoria abandoned him within hours. She'd sensed a shift in power, the way animals sense earthquakes. By evening, she'd transferred to a competitor. I watched her collect her personal items from her pristine corner office, and I felt nothing. She was never the real problem. April 15th, 2024. The dossier was ready. I didn't create it out of revenge. I created it out of duty. It contained 147 pages. 23 emails documenting Marcus's pressure on Sarah Chun to bypass compliance protocols. 34 calendar entries showing conflict of interest with vendor contracts. Financial records of the settlement paid to the wrong client. Documentation of the nepotistic hire. Compliance violations related to the Westwood Partners presentation. 7 separate instances of gaslighting toward employees who questioned his decisions. Records of the hidden commission from Victoria's brother's contract. Emails where Marcus explicitly told employees to forget about conversations that contradicted official statements. I didn't leak it. That wasn't my style. Instead, I requested a meeting with Thomas Blackwell. Just me and him, in a conference room at a neutral location. I brought the dossier in a leather folder and set it on the table between us. "What is this?" he asked, though he already knew. "Documentation." I said, "Everything your investigation will find, but faster, so you can take appropriate action without prolonging the company's exposure." Thomas opened it. I watched his expression shift from curiosity to shock to quiet, professional fury. "This is," he started, "damaging." I finished. "Yes, but it's all verifiable. Every email, every transaction, every violation. You'll find it all." "Why are you giving me this?" he asked, studying me like I was a puzzle he needed to solve. "Because I believe in accountability," I said. "Because the people who break the rules shouldn't profit from them. And because I think Marcus Reed needs to learn that his position doesn't place him above consequences." Thomas Blackwell closed the folder slowly. "If this is accurate." "It is," I said. "Then he's finished." April 23rd, 2024. Marcus Reed arrived at Meridian Capital's headquarters on what he thought was a normal Tuesday. It wasn't. The board had called an emergency meeting. By 10 a.m., he was being confronted with evidence of every transgression I'd documented. His face cycled through colors: confusion, anger, desperation, and finally, understanding. He tried to spin it. "Nathan's behind this," he said, pointing at me. "I've been asked to attend, though I remained silent. He's a disgruntled employee trying to destroy me because I didn't promote him." "We have emails where you explicitly overrode compliance," Thomas Blackwell said. cutting him off. We have financial records. We have testimony from multiple employees. This has nothing to do with Nathan Cole and everything to do with your choices. Marcus looked at me, and I saw it. The moment he understood, I'd never raised my voice. I'd never made a scene. I'd simply assembled the truth and presented it. The truth had done all the work. By end of business, Marcus Reed had resigned. The board issued a statement. Leadership transition due to personal reasons. The real story would leak to the financial press within days. By next week, every major publication would carry headlines about the compliance violations, the fraud, the nepotism, the harassment. His career was over. May 1st, 2024. I stood in the same boardroom where Marcus had humiliated me 6 months earlier. But this time, I was standing beside Thomas Blackwell as the board announced a new chief operating officer. Me. The room was silent. Then applause. Genuine, respectful applause from people who understood that competence and integrity weren't weaknesses. They were virtues worth rewarding. Sarah Chun would be promoted to Vice President of Compliance. James Liu would head up IT security with a $50,000 raise. The culture was already beginning to shift back toward excellence instead of narcissism, toward merit instead of favoritism. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. 3 weeks later, I passed Marcus on the street. He was walking alone, his expensive suit looking like a costume now, his face aged a decade. He saw me and looked away. Not out of shame. Marcus was probably incapable of genuine shame, but out of recognition. He'd lost something he'd taken for granted. Power. And he'd lost it to the one person he'd never believed was watching. I kept walking. I didn't feel victorious. I felt something quieter. At peace. 6 months later. Meridian Capital's Q3 numbers were the strongest in company history. Without the distraction of Marcus's schemes and the damage of his mismanagement, the company thrived. Clients we'd almost lost returned. Employees who'd been considering leaving stayed. The culture shifted, almost overnight, from one built on fear to one built on trust. One evening, I sat in my corner office, the one with a view of the city stretching out like a promise, and reviewed my journey. I'd come understand something profound. Revenge isn't about rage. It's not about throwing chairs or screaming in boardrooms. Real revenge, the kind that actually changes things, is about patience. It's about documenting truth. It's about understanding that power taken through manipulation is power built on sand. Marcus Reed had assumed I was weak because I was quiet. He'd mistaken competence for compliance. He'd forgotten that the people who fix problems are often the only ones who truly understand how systems work. Patience isn't weakness. Patience is intelligence waiting for the right moment. I'd been waiting for 2 years, and I'd been patient enough to win. The city lights twinkled below me like scattered diamonds. Somewhere out there, Marcus Reed was wondering how his empire had crumbled so completely. He'd look for enemies in the wrong places. He'd never understand that his greatest threat had been sitting silently at the table the entire time. This was justice, not the kind that demanded an audience, the kind that simply demanded the truth. And the truth, as it turned out, was more powerful than any revenge could ever be. I learned something the day Marcus Reed's empire crumbled. Respect isn't given by the people at the top of the seating chart. It's earned through integrity, patience, and an unwavering belief in your own worth. When he humiliated me in that boardroom, I didn't lose anything. I simply understood what I've been waiting for. My silence wasn't weakness. It was preparation. My invisible work wasn't overlooked. It was ammunition for the moment when truth finally mattered. If you're reading this, gaslit into believing you're the problem, told your competence makes you difficult, remember, your boundaries aren't obstacles. They're the foundation of your power. I watched a man destroy himself because he never believed I was paying attention, but I was always paying attention. We always are. Our silence holds more leverage than their noise ever could. So I'm asking you to do something radical. Stop shrinking. Tell someone today that their worth was never in question. It was only waiting to be remembered. Subscribe for more stories about turning humiliation into triumph, boundaries into power, and survival into revolution. Because the real ending, you get to write that. and it's going to be extraordinary.